My father died in 1982 on September 11th. I think he really looked at himself as a world citizen, completely free. He wanted to go everywhere. When I was born, he was already 60 years old, so he was an old father. He was, I would say, an absent father, in the sense that we would see him at times. He was very absorbed in his own work, notably in a small town on the Italian Riviera, on the coast, called Albisola. We used to spend, the winters in Paris, and for my father, he preferred to stay in Albisola. And when he would come up to Paris, it was total mayhem, because of course he had set up all these appointments with all his artist friends, or gallerists, or museum curator, or publishers, and there was some kind of tornado going through the house. In the summertime, we would go down to Albisola and spend all of the summer there. And I remember he would often paint, and he would put music on very loud, and he would be, on all fours painting on the ground. I remember walking right into paint brushes and onto actual drawings, and he was not very careful with his paintings. My father was born in the early part of the 20th century in Cuba. His father was Chinese, a Chinese immigrant, and my grandmother was originally from Africa. Also, she was a mestizo from also a Spanish descendant. My father grew up in Sagua La Grande and then eventually went to Havana to go to art school. Then he got a scholarship which allowed him to go to Spain, to Madrid. He wanted to become a portraitist. And if you look at the early paintings, there are many, many portraits. It's very interesting to look at my father's work in Spain and see the changes when he comes to Paris. There's a self-portrait of 1926, which is very realistic. And then there's a painting from early 1938, which is already stylized, but in the style of Matisse, very flat colors, bright. And then there's a small self-portrait, which is extremely stylized. Really the eyes are there, and African masks comes forth in a much more prominent way. I think my father was very proud of his mixed heritage. One has to remember that at the time in the Caribbean, the ancestry was denied. You wouldn't put forward the fact that you were African or even Chinese for that matter. There are no African artifacts or sculptures in the Caribbean. So he, in a way, rediscovers his African roots when he comes to Europe. And when he meets Picasso, and he has this famous meeting where Picasso takes this mask and tells my father, "You should be proud of this." My father looks at Picasso somewhat in bewilderment and says, "Why?" "Because your ancestors did this." And my father all of a sudden realizes that his ancestry, the African ancestry, is important. What Picasso did is really to empower him and to make him proud of where he came from. The wonderful thing about the meeting with Picasso was he made him meet all these incredible people. So he was right away steeped into the thick of the Parisian artistic life. He was with the Surrealists. Actually, he met most of the Surrealists when he left Paris and stayed in Marseille just after the Nazi invasion in 1940. I think he saw himself as part of the Surrealist movement, definitely. Now, was he a Surrealist? He would claim so at moments and at other times not. And it's always been a problem how to define my father. What school did he belong to? And that's why I think his work is so unique. When he comes back to Cuba in 1940, he's by that time politically aware. He's engaged. He's fought in the Civil War in Spain. He's seen the Nazi invasion of France, and he sees the injustices, the way the blacks are treated. His painting at that time becomes political. His art, I guess, is political, not as social realism depicting struggle and stuff like that, but I think it wants to he said it himself, to give a poetic excitement, and in that sense awaken in people a sense of belonging or even justice that he could then act upon. I think the fact that he couldn't be labeled before and that his work can be looked upon in a different way, I think it has a lot to do with maybe our changing views and our openness to embrace other cultures today.